Evening to anyone joining. This is my latest Facebook Live. This is a post-spring budget. The spring budget was just yesterday. I've got Jamie with me, as has been the case for the last couple. Jamie is content moderator, question asker, Andrew Marr, Piers Morgan, you name it, that's what Jamie's here for.
I've gone up since last time, Piers Morgan.
Well, depends what you think. So we'll give it a couple of minutes before we dive into the questions and answers. But just a reminder, if you've got questions as I'm answering anything, put them in the comments. Jamie's keeping an eye on them. He'll feed them to me, make sure I'm answering your questions, and this is as useful and informative. I've got my trusty spring budget red book. This contains all the policy options that have been chosen. Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Some people have seen your story, Anthony, in my family, and said, and I've explained it to them, but you put on a picture of your name in the green benches.
Yes.
What is the deal behind that?
Yeah, so I put this on the story yesterday as a way of explaining a little bit about how Parliament works. So it was a little green piece of card in a slip in front of the green benches. In Parliament, we call it a prayer card. And so anyone who looks at it will see that it said prayers on it, and it says the date, and you write your name on it, write your constituency, and put it in the slip. That is essentially a member of Parliament reserving their seat for the day. And so because I put that in the slip, I turned up for prayers. Prayers happens first before anything else happens in Parliament, just as we're about to start doing our business for the day. The Speaker comes in with a chaplain and conducts prayers. And as long as your slip is back in for prayers, so you put it in at the start of the day, turn back up for prayers, make sure it's still there, and as long as you're in at that point and you take part in prayers, then that is your seat for the day. And you can imagine on budget day, if anyone watched it, you saw how busy the chamber gets. 650 MPs, you can only fit, 450-ish sitting on the seats, and there's 300 and odd Conservatives. So there's lots who don't get a seat, so you've got to be assiduous in putting in the slip. So that's what the prayer card is. It's me reserving my seat, making sure I could be in the chamber, representing Burnley and Padiham, listening to the Chancellor as he read out the spring budget.
So what time would you have to get there? Were there a big queue when you actually got in the morning?
So on budget day, you've got to get to the House of Commons pretty early. So the queue started forming at about 7 in the morning.
Did it?
So the doorkeepers, and if anyone's been on my coach trip down to London, you'll know who the doorkeepers are. They wear, they're very smartly dressed. They're in black suits with a gold emblem on their chest. They put out all the chairs. So if you do get there at 7 o'clock in the morning, you're not standing waiting, because they don't even open the doors until about 8:30 in the morning. So
everyone just stood there for an hour and a half?
Yeah, you got to be at the front of the queue. Especially
Who was at the front of the queue? Do you remember?
I'm not gonna say, but it was a studious colleague. It's funny because you see the same colleagues early in the queue. It means you can get a good seat. And in a budget day, it's very noisy, very rowdy. You want to have a good seat. One, so you can support the Chancellor if you're on the government benches, but two, because it gets quite loud, and if you want to really hear what's going on, you got to be close to the front.
Yeah. So the budget obviously took place yesterday.
We'll dive straight in. We've got a couple of viewers now.
Yeah. Can you sum it up in 60 seconds?
So, are you timing me?
I will actually time you for this. So if you get past 60, I'm going to stop you.
60 seconds in the budget. So condensing this into 60 seconds.
And you're on.
So I think we all accept that the last couple of years, because of the COVID pandemic, because of the war in Ukraine, energy price rises, inflation very high, global interest rates high, it's been difficult for the last couple of years. This budget was about recognising all of that, saying, yes, we've had to increase taxes. I'm really honest about it. It's not what I wanted to do, but we've had to do it. What this budget does is put us on a path to lowering them. So I can't sit here and say we have undone all of the tax rises we've had to do, because that wouldn't be responsible public finances, right? What people in Burnley and Padiham, whether you're a business owner or a worker, a family where everyone's in work or you're looking for work, you need the economy to be well managed. And this budget was about managing the economy well, investing in public services, but also rewarding people and making sure that working always pays. So national insurance cut, child benefit reform, productivity in the NHS, lots going on, and I've just hit my 60
That's
seconds.
your 60 seconds. Yes, thanks for that, Anthony. So there's been a lot of comments that have come in. A number of people have got different questions. I kind of grouped them on what people have been talking about.
Okay.
So an area where people have been speaking is pensioners.
Yes.
So from reading the comments, a number of pensioners are basically saying, what did we get out of the budget?
Yeah.
That's kind of the flavour of what they're getting at. So just a bit of an explanation on that, on that point really. What about pensioners?
Look, I think it's a really fair question. I think people watch these big events, be it a budget or an autumn statement or something like that, and the media like to try and pit groups against each other, if I'm being honest. This budget was very much about rewarding those who are paying those extra taxes. And if you think about someone in work, you know, as we are, but tens of thousands of people across Burnley and Paddy, you're taxed twice when you're in work. You pay your income tax, but then you also pay national insurance. And actually, there is an unfairness in that system because every other person, be they getting their income because they're a landlord, and so they get all the rental income in and do something like that, they're only paying one tax, income tax. And so actually, this was about saying we want to reduce tax on those who are in work. And, you know, we shouldn't forget that late last year, we announced a massive increase in the state pension. So just above 8%, that was more than wages were going up by. So the triple lock says pensions will go up by 2.5%, average earnings or inflation. Well, 2.5% was the minimum. They were always going to go up by that. Average earnings were not at 8%, but inflation was. It's not now, but it was.
Yeah, what is it now? Is it 4%?
4% now. And in April, so in 20 days' time, the state pension will rise by 8.2%. That's what pensions will go up by. We announced that last year. And I get the frustration pensions have when they watch a budget and go, well, there's nothing for us in this. But I think we need to separate the two out, right? Because when we announced the 8.2% in the triple lock, we announced nothing for those in work.
Yeah.
It's just
that was
because
the autumn statement, weren't it?
It was before the autumn statement.
Before.
Yeah, so the triple lock, the percentage we increased pension by, that has its own timetable.
Right.
So it's just because of the parliamentary timetable for when decisions need to be made.
Right.
Pension triple lock, we announced it in October, budget is in March. So, you know, I think whether you're in work or a pensioner, you know, in the new financial year that starts next month, you're going to see an increase in your take-home pay, either because of the pension triple lock or because of the national insurance reduction. And, you know, I think that's the right thing. I think the triple lock is a really important part. I've been very clear with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think it's something that needs to be in our manifesto again. Yeah. Because I think it talks to our values and the importance we put on people who have done the right thing their whole life, paid into the system, worked hard, and in later life, in retirement, we should reward them and recognise that.
Yeah, because you have been quite a supporter of the triple lock for anyone else.
I think it's really important, and that's not an electoral thing, right? It's what are your values? And my values say we should always reward hard work. Now, for those in work, how do we reward hard work? Well, we make sure that they're not paying excessive taxes, and that's why we're on this glide path down. Now that the economy is in better shape, inflation down, wages up, the economy growing faster than all our European neighbours, right? These are some massive things. They don't happen by accident, and because we've been able to do it, we can start lowering taxes. And because of all of that, we can also afford to increase pensions by 8%. Yeah. But we've got to manage the economy in that way. And so when the Chancellor stood up and spoke about national insurance, he was really clear, like the Office for Budget Responsibility said this is a pro-growth measure. Yeah. So the expectation, and it's in the Red Book here, is that this, by cutting national insurance, for those in work, will generate about 200,000 more jobs. Yeah. That's really important. You know, I think about all the people in Burnley who are looking for work. We've got vacancies, but it's about making work pay. This is really good. And that in turn helps us fund things like the triple lock. So it's a virtuous circle.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, in terms of the money, there were a lot of conversation last night on your post about what it actually means in terms of hard cash, because I don't know how anyone can be against a tax reduction.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. You always get the whataboutery. What about this? What about that? But how much is it actually going to be worth for a typical worker in Burnley? How much are we talking?
So if you're on a £25,000 a year salary, you know, because of the cut we did in January and this cut, which we're going to get through next week in a single day to make sure it's in pay, you know, it takes effect from the start of April, £500 every single year.
Right.
And if you're on £35,000 a year, that goes up to £900.
Right.
Now imagine if you're in a household where both people are earning £25,000 a year,
Yeah.
that's an extra £1,000 in your household budget. Now that makes a massive difference when it comes to the cost of living, and ultimately that's why we want to cut taxes.
Yeah.
Because it helps people with their bills. You know, we know wages are growing and inflation is coming down, but it's still tough. You know, inflation at 4% is still too high. So how do we help people with that? I think is we cut their taxes, we help make sure there's more money in people's pay pocket.
Yeah. So Dan's basically just said, how are you getting these questions? Basically, the questions from yesterday evening with the post where you said, ask me questions. These are where these questions are coming. And he does ask about potholes. We'll come on to potholes later though, Anthony. Still on this budget.
And some questions were emailed in yesterday as well.
So just on this budget, the question about national insurance thresholds has come up.
Right.
So there's a couple here. So someone says, "Oh, why is the threshold been increased to a minimum of 15,000?" That's one. Another one says, "We could create a new high rate of 100 to 150,000." Basically, taking the threshold and changing them. What's your position on that, really?
Yeah. So you can cut taxes in any number of ways. So changing tax thresholds is a way of cutting tax. Because you increase the threshold, that means people aren't either pulled into the tax band, or if you're above it, you get a tax cut as a result of it. That is one way of doing it. The problem you've got with it is if you accept the basic premise, as I do, that people in work and people earning should pay one form of tax, then we've still got a really complicated system. So we've got income tax and national insurance, both have thresholds. So we can take the view that, yes, we just increase thresholds, but the tax system, one, is still complicated because those in work are paying double tax, and those who get their income from stuff like rent, you know, big landlords who have 100 properties giving all their money in, they're only paying one tax, they're paying income tax. They're not paying national insurance on the income they get from rent. And I think that's unfair. I think we should make sure that whether you get your money from the job you're in or your rental income or any other source, you should pay the same amount of tax. So yes, we could have changed thresholds, but it wouldn't have simplified that system. It wouldn't have, in my view, made it fairer. So what we've done is we did the national insurance cut in January. We've just doubled it now. That puts us on a path to simplify the tax system, and it's a way of in a much speedier way, getting money back into people's pockets.
Well, that kind of ties to what Reese is asking. What's something you would have liked to have seen in the budget that didn't make it this time around? Are you basically going down the route there of just putting it into one tax when you talk about fairer?
I don't think you can do that straight away. Look, long-term plan, I think we absolutely should simplify the tax system. Yeah. You do that by continuing to reduce taxes and eventually merging national insurance and income tax into one.
Yeah,
that's the long-term simple way of doing it. But if there was one thing I wanted in the budget, there's probably two things that I would have liked to see in the budget that weren't, and the things that I'll keep lobbying the Chancellor on. One is about our business community in Burnley and Padiham and Briarfield, our small businesses. There's some support there with business rates relief, and the Chancellor announced some loan schemes, which are great and really positive. But I think we could have maybe done some things to help some of the industries really struggling a little bit. Things like hospitality, we could have reduced VAT a little bit on hospitality. And the other thing, and it's pretty close to my heart, is helping first-time buyers. Right, there are young people across Burnley and Padiham, and we've got relatively cheap housing stock, right? Yeah. We've got some of the lowest house prices in the country, but it's still really difficult to get on the housing ladder.
It's the deposit, isn't it?
It's the deposit, and so I've been working with the Chancellor and the Secretary of State who covers housing, it's Michael Gove, and I fed in some ideas to them about some mortgage proposals. One of them is like a regeneration mortgage. So allowing people to buy some of our slightly more dilapidated homes, maybe ones that are vacant at the minute, they need a bit of doing up. But if you're that first-time buyer, you might just be able to get enough to get your deposit together, but you're not going to have enough to then renovate the property. And actually, is there some stuff we can do with banks to go, well, if you take out the mortgage, you can borrow against the future value of the home. Exactly the same way we do with self-build mortgages.
Right.
I know that's something that the Chancellor is keen to do, it's something that Michael Gove is keen to do, but as I said at the start, you can only do things in a responsible way with the public finances. And if they'd done that and it wasn't responsible, one, it falls apart quite quickly, but two, we're loading debt on future generations, and I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, that's fair. Couple of people talking at the moment, Stephen and then Dan again comes in about energy. So Dan makes the point of a pension increase to match his huge energy increase.
Yeah.
And Dan's saying, how about taxing the energy providers? So I think take the two issues, like what support has there been with energy, number one, and then number two, are we taxing energy providers adequately? I guess is the question that you're being asked, Anthony.
So I think it's first worth saying energy prices are starting to come down. Now, are they coming down quickly enough, and is that being passed on quickly enough? I would suggest not. But we have seen from the start of April the price cap, so the maximum an energy company can charge per unit of electricity and gas, that is coming down. And Ofgem, the independent regulator, says that'll save households a couple of £100 a year. Again, it's based on averages, so it depends on how much energy a household is using. So they are starting to come down. But I think, Dan and the other chap, Stephen, who mentioned it, I think they're right? We need energy companies to play their part, because you can't, on the one hand, say you're a good corporate citizen, and then on the other hand, see massive record profits at a time that households are really struggling. That's why we've got in place something called the Energy Profits Levy. Okay. And what that's designed to do is tax energy companies who are making windfall profits on the back of the war that's going on in Europe. Yeah. Because no company should profiteer on rising prices because of a war, because we should remember that war is having a real impact on real people in Ukraine and families and stuff there. So the energy price levy makes sure there is an additional tax in there. That's the tax that is helping to pay for things like the Household Support Fund. So one of the things that the Chancellor announced in the budget yesterday was an extension of the Household Support Fund. This is a chunk of money, we're talking billions of pounds, given to local authorities. So in our case, Lancashire County Council and Burnley Borough Council, to help them provide support to households on a totally discretionary basis. Because we all know government can design lots of schemes and there'll be people who fall through the nets, or now, people who, even though energy bills are starting to come down, maybe they're locked into high prices, their house might not be well insulated, they're still suffering quite high bills. And the Household Support Fund will mean that Burnley Borough Council gets another chunk of money to help households who apply to it and say, I need some extra support. So as soon as I've got information on how Burnley Borough Council are going to administer that, what their eligibility criteria is, I'll make sure that those who contact me get that. So if you're in that category, please do get in touch with me. I'll make sure it's passed on. And the Chancellor said that will be extended for another 6 months because, inflation is still at 4%, and that is still 2% above target. So whilst it's come down from 11 to 4, that's not enough. That's still having a massive impact on people and their bills and just the general cost of living. Yeah.
Well, taking it to global issues, really, Heather actually posted a question on that you posted yesterday. Accepting global issues have and are negatively impacting the economy, or have done over, she says have and are. Yeah. Presumably she's been following you, talking about Ukraine and all the things that you've been mentioning. What aspects of this budget addresses the country's need for more self-sufficiency?
Yeah, I think it comes back to one of the earlier points I was talking about. So the budget can do lots of things, but it can't address all problems. There is stuff in there about long-term growth, because ultimately that's what helps our long-term prosperity as a country. It's getting the economy moving. But I do want to give a plug to some of the other things that the government's announced. So the Prime Minister very keen to make sure we're supporting farmers, because suddenly, because of what's happened particularly in Ukraine, we're starting to see the impact food security has on national security. So there's much more work being done now within government departments to go, right, okay, what is our national food strategy? How do we make sure we're growing more of what we eat? We've also got the Energy Security Act. We passed that last year. That's about making sure that we're generating more of our own energy. So yesterday in the budget, continuing on that trend, Chancellor announced the continuation of the small modular reactor program. So it's nuclear energy, because we know, one, it's clean and it can generate significant amounts of power. So small modular reactors, I mean, they are the future, right? This is about taking something that would normally be on a colossal size. We've all seen the pictures of nuclear power plants. But if you can put a nuclear generator in a submarine, why can you not put something smaller than a current nuclear power station, which is quicker to build because you can build it in a factory and it will generate a lot of electricity. So that's what the small modular reactors are. They're factory built energy generation.
And they last forever, don't they?
And they last for decades and decades, can be renewed very easily. So he continued that program. So we've got a brilliant company, Rolls-Royce. They're one of the bidders that creates jobs.
Yeah.
But also, most importantly, it helps with our energy security here.
And
then, just before we finish, they announced that the government has reached agreement with a company called Hitachi to buy a whole swathe of land in North Wales, in Anglesey or Ynys to build a Wilfer power station. So Wilfer is what power station will be called.
Yeah.
So if you see reference to it, Wilfer is going to be a new generation nuclear power plant on top of the other nuclear power stations that we're building, all forming part of this umbrella Great British Nuclear, which is designed to do exactly what we've been talking about, get energy security. And that all comes on top of our Offshore Licensing Act, which is about making sure that we are self-sufficient or more self-sufficient in oil and gas. We're not going to get to total self-sufficiency because we use more than we can produce from the North Sea. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't increase our own production so that in a worst case scenario, we've got more of what we need here at home.
Yeah, and you get an agreement on the comments here. Someone saying totally agree on nuclear. And I mean, people say to you, Anthony, all the time, he always mentions a Burnley Paddy in Parliament. I have heard you in Parliament talk about energy security on a number of
I think it's really important. And
it's the baseline for everything.
Yeah, and I think it's a great shame that some of our political opponents are not in favour of nuclear. There's a clip actually of Nick Clegg, former leader of the Liberal Democrats, speaking in 2010-11 when he was Deputy Prime Minister, and he was asked about why the Lib Dems were so opposed to nuclear power, and he said, well, because it takes so long to deliver, and even if we approved it now, it wouldn't be generating electricity until 2021.
I know.
Well, how brilliant would it be now if we were getting a new fleet of nuclear power stations? Think of the impact that would have had on energy bills when Putin invaded Ukraine. Right? You've got to take long-term decisions. You can't forecast 10 years ahead, but if you take the decision now, then you can prevent issues down the line. And, because those decisions weren't taken in 2010-11, the last Labour government didn't approve a single nuclear power station.
Yeah.
The last generation of nuclear power stations were commissioned under Thatcher and Major.
Which is crackers, isn't it?
And this is a basic necessity for households across the country. So it's really important. It's why there is such a push, and people will see it on nuclear power now and oil and gas, because we've got to undo the mistakes of the past and actually get on with commissioning this stuff, because it makes a difference now. But importantly, it'll keep making a difference in times that we can't yet foresee. Yeah,
and another thing, it's part of a mix, isn't it? Irene's saying here, and I kind of know where you're going to go with this, what about wind and hydropower too?
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
More of it.
Yeah.
I think the more types of energy we've got, the greater the level of resilience. So wind power's great at certain points. It's definitely more efficient than it used to be, but wind might not work all the time. Solar won't work all the time. Nuclear works all the time. And energy grids are going to have to be totally different to what they were before. We're used to, you can have a whole fleet of coal power stations or gas power stations, and they'll do 100% of it. That's not going to be the case moving forward. Yeah. So we've got to get a good mix.
Yeah, and that's that's the answer to Stephen's next point. He's talking about his high energy bills and how high they've gone.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, what you're talking about there is a result of businesses getting cheaper energy, but also households getting cheaper energy.
Yeah, look, I am under no illusion. I know the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are. Energy bills have been too high. They've been really difficult for households to manage. Government has tried to do its part. It's tried to subsidise bills. So we spent about £100 billion supporting households and businesses with their energy needs. And that was, a year after COVID, where we'd spent £350 billion supporting jobs through the furlough scheme, helping our businesses, being in Burnley Town Centre, on high streets, survive through grants. £450 billion. So when I talk about tax cuts, I know I'm doing it from a position of having had to make some really difficult choices about increases in corporation tax or freezing tax thresholds. They're not decisions that any Conservative wants to make.
Yeah.
And so the tax burden rose. It rose to a level we're not comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with how high taxes are, but we can't get rid of it in one fell swoop. We've got to do it in a responsible way. And I say that because all of that has an impact on energy bills.
Yeah, and to be fair, just a quick fire question here, to put it into perspective, when we talk about £450 billion, to put that into perspective for anybody watching, pick a government department and give the yearly budget for that defence or schools.
So the entire health budget for the whole of the NHS across the whole country is 181 billion, I think it is. The defence budget is about 50 billion. I think it's 52 billion pounds this coming financial year. So
out of a tax take of what, 800 and odd million or something. So when we're talking of half of the entire tax take for the year.
And the year then we had to borrow all of that and spend all of that. All those government departments still were running.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, well, the government departments don't need to spend and we'll divert the cash. It was all additional money that we had to borrow, and it was the right thing to do because it saved people's jobs, saved people's lives, and made sure that we shielded people from the worst part of the energy bills and what they could have been. But I know it's still tough.
Yeah,
it's what motivates me every day that I'm going and speaking to the Chancellor and going, right, okay, well, what are we going to do now? How are we going to help normal people, hard-working people? Because that's what I got into politics to do.
Well, talking of going and speaking to the Chancellor, going and speaking about people and businesses in Burnley and Padiham, Sandra jumps in saying that, well, first off, she says she likes your idea on helping first-time buyers get on the property ladder, which is good.
Good.
Yeah.
The Chancellor was interested.
Yeah.
He just couldn't do it at this point, but we're continuing our discussions on it.
Yeah, and she says it was great to see you promoting, showcasing Hafner's pies in number 10 Downing Street. Thanks for promoting them. We all love Hafner's.
Absolutely.
It's a good business.
And I think I said either in the post or the comments, we've got so many brilliant businesses across Burnley, Padiham, villages, and it's always really difficult picking one to take to a Downing Street event. But I think Hafner's is one of those iconic Burnley brands that everyone knows, and I can't miss an opportunity because the Prime Minister likes to brag about some of his pie makers over in Yorkshire. And I thought, well, we've got to show him what a proper pie maker.
It's in the crust, isn't it?
It is in the way. The crust, the filling. I had a really good chat with Ted about pies.
Yeah.
And I like pies.
We all like pies, Anthony. Taking it on to, going back to the budget for a second, but taking it onto the NHS bit.
Yeah.
We did have a question come in about the extra 2.45 billion that has been put into the NHS. Basically asking, is this going to be used for doctors and nurses?
Yes. This is money so what happens is the NHS comes to government, comes to the Chancellor and says, for us to deliver what you've asked us to do, here's what it's going to cost.
Yeah.
That had a shortfall of I think it was 2.4 billion. Chancellor with the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary said, right, well, we need you to do it. We need to get waiting lists down. We need to improve emergency care. We need to see improvements in health outcomes. So if that's what it costs to do it, then we should do it. And, the NHS, it touches all of us. At various stages of our life, literally from cradle to grave, it is I would say, and I suspect many would agree with me, one of our most important public services. And it's why, the second vote I ever took part in Parliament was to increase NHS funding.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of that, but that's not the end of the story, because if the NHS comes back as it did and says, well, yes, we've got an increase in funding, but the pressures are growing. An ageing population, advanced medicine brings pressure. It's a good problem to have, but it brings pressure. And if we can do stuff to help alleviate that pressure, and I know from going to Royal Blackburn Hospital just a couple of weeks ago, I know what that pressure looks like. I've been in Royal Blackburn professionally to talk about it, but I've been there personally with family. And, I was pretty clear with the judge. If the NHS comes and says it needs more money to deliver what we need it to do, then we should give it. That doesn't mean it comes without condition. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be really tough on scrutinising how they're spending money. But it means we do want to see more doctors, more nurses, not more middle managers.
Yeah, I mean, and as well, like we talk about the 2.45 billion. There were another aspect.
There was another
3.4 billion.
Yeah, so 3.4 billion in addition to the two and a bit, and that's just for productivity.
I think that's more important, personally.
So one of the things, and we all know from going into whether it's the GP or hospital, we all know that there are systems and processes that are too bureaucratic, and if you were in private sector you wouldn't do it that way, partly because the NHS is a massive organisation and implementing change is expensive and quite difficult. But there's no reason we can't have the most advanced, digitally driven NHS. So can we buy more advanced diagnostic equipment that results in more scans, more often, and a quicker diagnosis by using technology to help figure out where a problem is? So MRI scans from 20 years ago, totally different from MRI scanners now. The ones now can help a doctor figure out what the problem is much quicker. And so what the productivity plan is about saying, right, let's take that. Let's replace the old kit that slows down a process and replace it with the new stuff that's quicker. And let's replace systems to make them more efficient. Let's improve the NHS app so you can rearrange appointments much quicker, so you can do things that don't necessarily require you to have human involvement in everything.
Yeah, because I'm going to say, am I right in saying, because what I got from that, and I don't know if anyone else has thought this, but what I got from that was you can order your shopping online, you can order something on Amazon to come the day later, you can book cinema tickets online, you can do anything practically online. I know a lot of the older generation might be not so comfortable with it, but people our age are used to doing everything online. Is it a move towards that or not?
Well, in part, I think yes, there is a part about our interaction with the NHS as users of the system, and the app is a good example of how you can make that easier for us. But you're right? There'll be people out there who aren't comfortable with the NHS app. This is actually mostly about the stuff that the NHS itself uses. Right. So making their processes quicker and more efficient so that you're not having to wait. It's not that test results are sent on paper by letter. Yeah. That medical records are really easy to view wherever you are in the country. So your GP can get the notes from a hospital you might have visited because you got ill whilst you were visiting family in a different part of the country. That's a really simple example. That's really easy to do, but some of the other stuff is more complicated to do. And actually with artificial intelligence, being able to analyse vast amounts of data, can we help doctors by saying, look, artificial intelligence has analysed millions of brain scans, and now, looking at a brain scan, we think this is where you need to do some more intensive investigation. That helps the consultant and the surgeons, and it speeds everything up. And there was an example that the Chancellor used as he was speaking about consultants being able to deliver thousands more surgical operations. Yeah. Now think about how that would tackle the backlog.
Yeah, this is it. All of that sounds like you've got a number of comments coming in here. Basically just saying kind of the same as what you'd said your experiences were at Blackburn Royal. People saying it's a mess and patients are being dehydrated in there. There's issues, but you've seen it and you've spoken with them and you kind of touched on it.
Look, all my conversations with East Lancs Hospitals NHS Trust, the staff are doing a brilliant job. they're just experiencing massive demand that 5-10 years ago wasn't there. So you look and you can go on their website and look now and see the average wait times, and you'll see that there's 100+ people in the emergency department.
Yeah.
But from when I was talking to them, they said, look, 4 years ago that number would have been at 50. Now that, you know, without a massive increase in space and capacity and staff, they're not going to be able to deal with it. And so me and other East Lancashire MPs have written to the health minister and asked for a meeting so that we can work with government, work with the trust to go, right, what can we do more of? And, you know, I would say this, right, but we can use Burnley General Hospital much better. Burnley Hospital is a brilliant facility. We all want to see it not just maintain itself as a brilliant facility, but we want to see it invested in. Yeah. Let's do more things at Burnley Hospital. That's how we secure its long-term future. That's the thing I'm pushing with ministers, you know, and it's doing brilliant work with the backlog because it can keep getting people through, but we can do more. And all I'd say to those people who are, you know, visiting Blackburn and commenting, I get it. As I said, I've been there professionally and I've been there personally. I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm going to keep doing everything I can. As I know, to be fair, all the other East Lancashire MPs, right? We all want to see the health service in our part of the world be the best possible. And it does some stuff really, really well. And actually, I think we should give the local NHS praise when it does stuff really well. So ambulance turnaround times, absolutely phenomenal. You know, people remember 12 months ago, news stories about ambulances sitting outside hospitals all the time. That wasn't the case for us because our trust is so good.
Yeah. Have you seen the new, well, you won't have seen it because yesterday was a very busy day for you, I'm sure. But I think yesterday was the first episode of a new, well, it's a show about the ambulances around here. Brilliant. My cousin's actually on it.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah, she's.
I've not seen it yet, but I will definitely give it a watch.
Yeah, it's good because it shows some of the things you're talking about, but the work you're talking about with the ambulance service.
Yeah, there's no silver bullet when it comes to NHS emergency care. Just as there's no silver bullet for, you know, any public policy problem, but I can reassure everyone I'm going to keep working on it, as I know my colleagues are, because we all want the NHS to be the best it possibly can be. The money the Chancellor announced yesterday will help, but if there's more we need to do, then you can bet your bottom dollar I'm going to be the one arguing for it.
Yeah, there's a few comments here, Anthony, that need bringing up with you based on what you're saying about the NHS. Diana talks about it's not a money issue. Speaking from experience, it's the design, ward design is not conducive, and it's more to do with the setup of things, which then leads on to Sandra saying, are they bringing in brand new computer systems because the ones they use on the wards are hard to deal with, staff struggle with. So I presume it's more about, if you say it's actually the internals of the NHS, it's more about changing the way that they operate to make it easier for the staff. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think there is some truth in physical design of things and that not making things easy. You know, the emergency department of Blackburn is quite constrained in terms of where it can grow, and that has an impact. That's a much more difficult problem to fix. But we can do some things, and I'm exploring some of them with the trust. Yes, computer systems, programs for different things, making everything more joined up and work together and be more intuitive for staff. That's all about productivity improvements, because what we really don't want is our doctors and nurses, you know, the clinicians who can deliver brilliant patient care when they're with a patient. We don't want them sat on a computer in the middle of a ward when they could be doing it on an iPad right next to a patient, and it all talks to each other. That's part of the problem at the minute, that some of those systems don't talk to each other. So you might see them walking with an iPad, but there's still work to do when you're back at the central desk. If we can ease some of that, then that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and thanks for that. I mean, Heather's mentioning about GPs. I know there's this whole pharmacy first with GPs, and I don't know if you wanted to touch on that. You're basically saying, can GPs be used better?
Yeah. Look, most GPs are, do a brilliant job. I think of my GP in Burnley, I think they're brilliant. You know, they're very responsive. That's not to say there might not be the odd surgery or two, and sometimes people write to me, email me with specific examples, and I always try and pick that up with the the practice, and I've just done a survey in a part of Burnley where I've had a few different complaints. But you're right. I mean, some of this is about reducing demand on GP surgeries as well, because just as demand is increasing in the emergency departments, not just in East Lancs but across the country, so too is demand increasing on GPs. And they're trying to be nimble and do things in slightly different ways, more phone appointments, video appointments, face-to-face appointments. And actually they all have a part to play, because whilst face-to-face appointments are what most people want, and actually what you need in most cases, if a GP finds they've got 15 minutes free because an appointment's not turned up, well, maybe they can use that 15 minutes to do 2 telephone appointments rather than sitting in the office and just going through stuff and pulling patients in who might not have turned up yet because their appointment's in 15 minutes time. Yeah. So it's about doing all of those things. And Pharmacy First is a brilliant initiative. It went live a couple of weeks ago. And what that means is, for a number of common conditions, you can go straight to a pharmacy. They can prescribe you medication that would otherwise be done by a GP. Thousands, in fact, I think it's millions of GP appointments they expect to be freed up because of that one change alone.
Even the pharmacist you were talking to about this was really buzzing over it.
Absolutely. Pharmacists are, you speak to any pharmacist about the training they go through to do their job, and they'll tell you how vigorous and robust it is, and we should use them better. And this is about doing exactly that, using pharmacists to deliver patient care quicker, more effectively, more efficiently, and freeing GPs up. So, we'll see how it goes. It's only been a couple of weeks, but I think it could be a model to roll out for other things, and that all benefits the whole system.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of getting to the end now if we're doing a 45-minute chat. There has been another question. This one's more party politics, and you always get questions of this nature. Craig is asking about your credentials, basically. Basically, the crux of his argument is, would you join Reform UK, and how do you think they will do in the general election? Basically, that's what he's getting at.
I can see the attraction for some people of Reform. People feel that sometimes politics doesn't work for them. And depending on the issue you care about, you might look at some parties and go, well, they're a better choice for me than another. I'm a conservative. I'm a conservative through and through. I've been in this party since I was 16 years old. And I genuinely believe that all the things that Reform talk about, we've got a solution to, and it's a more realistic, deliverable solution than what Reform are promising. And I think that's the case with lots of small parties. They talk a good game. It's the same with the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party. They talk a really good game, but actually when it comes down to delivering on the ground, they can't, because they're promising the world without being able to do it.
But it kind of links to the second bit then, which is how do you think that they'll do? That's what Craig's asking. I think Craig comes at the position of they're going to do really, really well.
Yeah.
I don't know if I buy into that really. What's your take on it?
I think if you look at some of the recent elections we've had, by-elections across the country, they're not doing well. And they're not doing well because they can't, much like the Labour Party, they can't tell you what their plan is for government because they don't have a plan. They've got lots of things they say they care about. Well, I care about immigration, but I've got a plan to bring it down. It's cutting legal migration, tackling small boats through the Rwanda scheme, through working with the authorities in France and put more physical measures in place to stop boats crossing. We can all stand up and say, I'm going to cut immigration, but unless you can say how you're going to do it. And I think, Reform have come up with a number of tax cutting proposals, but can't say how they'd pay for it. Well, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. If you're gonna try and take on the responsibility of governing and representing people, you've got to be honest with people about some of the tough choices. That's why I said earlier, our tax is too high. Yeah, but I voted for some of them. But I voted for some of them because I think it's important we're responsible with the public finances and we make decisions that are responsible for people in Burnley, in Padiham, in Briarfield, because that's what you elect me for. You don't elect me to be popular all the time. You elect me to make difficult decisions and to read. If I'd come here and not read the Red Book, I probably wouldn't have been able to answer these questions.
Yeah, I get that. Well, on that is 45 minutes, Anthony.
Have I answered broadly everything?
Yeah.
If there's quick fire questions, I'll try and give 10-15 seconds.
Okay, well, seeing as we've gone through most of what's in the budget, I think we haven't touched on 2 issues in the budget. Okay. You might have done it in your 60 seconds.
Right.
Which is the alcohol duty being frozen and fuel duty being frozen.
Yeah.
Which motorists and drinkers if it is.
So let me explain a couple of the policy decisions taken in the budget. So the first is obviously the national insurance cut. That was the big headline grabbing tax cut that the media are focused on, although it's only one of a number of things. So in January we cut national insurance from 12% to 10%. We've just cut it again in the announcement yesterday from 10% to 8%. As we said at the start, average worker worth hundreds of pounds a year. If you take a household with 2 people on, mid-£20,000 a year, that's £1,000 a year back into their household budget that they can spend on things. But if you're, if I take another bit of tax, if you're a senior engineer working in Burnley, you might have some management responsibilities. You might be on £51,000 a year. At the minute, if you're on that amount of money, there's something called the high income child benefit surcharge. And that means you start to lose your child benefit. And actually, when that was introduced, 50,000 was a very high salary. Now it's not. And so what we've done is we're going to reform that. We're going to make it fairer. And that means thousands of families across Burnley and Padiham will benefit because they're not going to have that applied. So they're going to keep more of the child benefit on top of the tax cut. All of these things are about making choices that help households manage their budgets better and put more money back in the pockets of people who get up and do the right thing.
People are thanking you for doing this. Sandra says thanks for your time. 7 p.m. next time, she says, would be better.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Diana says she needs to catch up. Sounds good. And the thing that I wanted to ask, if you wanted quick fire, what is the message of this year's budget in a quick fire? Not a long thing, but what's the message of it? When you take it all together, what's the message?
That we've got a long-term plan for the economy, for the country, and it is starting to bear fruit. We've been through a really difficult 4 years that have included pandemic and war and interest rates, and we're getting through it. The economy's turning, wages are growing, inflation is down, we're growing faster than most European countries. It's just starting to work, and we're starting to be able to pass on some of those benefits in the form of tax cuts. But is there more I want to do, and the Chancellor wants to do, and the Prime Minister wants to do? Absolutely. So this is the start, but we can only do it if we do it in a responsible way.
Thank you very much. And the last thing goes to Karen Hughes, which definitely 7 p.m. will be better, Anthony.
Right, okay. 7 p.m. is the consistent theme then, so 7 p.m. next time.
Okay, and then we're done.
Cool. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
See you next time.